History has been made by President Donald J. Trump yet again in his second term in office. After more than an hour of a one-on-one phone call, President Trump and Russian leader President Vladimir Putin had a productive conversation, that's how it's being characterized, that ranged from discussing the end of the horrific Ukraine war to preventing the breakout of a larger major war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. And joining us with more details on the Trump-Putin call is our very own DC White House correspondent, Garrett, live from the North Lawn of the White House. We haven't seen much from Trump, or any at all, right? He's been in the West Wing working all day, and there's been no media appearances scheduled. It's very interesting considering the whole, surrounding circumstances surrounding the Trump-Putin call.
That's right. We're here at the White House waiting maybe for somebody to come out like Caroline Levitt or some other spokesperson that has more information on the call. But as of right now, we're just waiting. And, we got the statement, obviously, the readout that the White House released about the call, which from what I understand was close to 2 hours long. And it was very successful for the most part. Both sides really want to work towards lasting peace. And the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, put out some very complimentary statements about President Trump, really just saying that they're on the same page for the most part, and that it was a successful call. But we have right here the readout, and I'm going to pull that up on my phone as we speak because this came out from the White House just a few moments ago. Today, President Trump and Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war, and it really is just detailing how about both leaders plan on really picking up these talks in the Middle East as a region of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts. And they both agreed strongly that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia has a huge upside, and that includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. And just really detailing how, both leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel, and that they discussed the need to stop the proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. So, really they just agreed to a limited ceasefire so that there's no more bombing and destruction of energy infrastructure. And I think that they're in talks for hopefully a full ceasefire eventually. But right now it doesn't seem like Putin agreed to a full ceasefire, but at least when it comes to energy, he did.
That's actually a pretty big concession from Vladimir Putin, and does suggest he wants to work towards something. We're actually going to talk to Moscow-based journalist Dimitri in just a moment, Kara, but I think it's very important. It sounds to me like that that readout highlights in large part the discussions about the Middle East conflict and Iran. And that is part of Trump's rationale in working with Putin on this as well, is because we know that Iran and Russia have grown stronger over the last 4 years, during which the Biden regime was in power. The Biden era foreign policy drove those two countries closer together, along with China, right, which was of concern to many of us. So this is an opportunity for Trump to utilize that relationship, potentially via Putin, to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel. I haven't also heard from any of the national security sources at the White House today. So it seems like there's a big focus that Trump is probably in a lot of meetings related to these national security and foreign policy issues. Kara.
Yeah, it seems to be. Like I said, it's been pretty quiet here. We've been here all day, and really no one has come out to speak to us as of the taping of the show. As of right now, no one has come out to speak to us. And, like you said, the president is very busy. He did have on his schedule to sign executive orders today as well. So I believe he's busy with that today, on top of that really historic call with Vladimir Putin. And, I think getting somebody out here and talking to the press is probably on the agenda. It's just a matter of when. But as of right now, no statement yet.
Yeah. And just for our audience to understand, there's constant activity in the Trump White House. It's very different from the Biden White House. It was like a dead zone during the Biden years, of which I covered a little over one. But the Trump years, there's all these officials going back and forth, and we often not have access to talk to them. So on a day that you have none of that activity, it suggests that there's a lot going on behind the doors of the West Wing, and that Trump is engaging in a lot of meetings and strategic planning. Kara Casanova, of course, thank you for always being there on the ground with us for the very latest. We'll catch up with you tomorrow, when I'm sure we'll have more information and probably a little more leaks, or perspective, at least context, from mumblings at the White House on how that call went. And like I said, in just a moment, we're going to talk to Moscow-based journalist Dimitri on the Russian perspective and how they felt the call went. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, Emerald.
Even before the momentous call, though, the warmongering neoconservative, neoliberal elites of the West were castigating Trump and insulting Putin. One voice in particular rose above the neocon rage like an awful, cackling echo from a horrific bygone era. I'm referring to, of course, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was in Europe today to share her outrage.
The killings and the war crimes. And I just think now, especially when some people are meeting in conference rooms to talk about making a deal to bring an end to the war in Ukraine, they need to be forcefully reminded of what the human toll has been. And it is just outrageous to think that the suffering of the Ukrainian people could somehow be overlooked in whatever conversations are going on between and among governments.
Now, you can be sure that if Hillary Clinton and the neocons are mad at Trump for daring to discuss peace with Putin, then Trump is absolutely making the right moves. But what exactly were the details of the talks, and how did the Russians really take those talks? For more on that, we bring in Moscow-based journalist and host of the New Rules Geopolitics podcast, Dimitri. Dimitri, it's good to see you again. Thank you for jumping on with us today. You were ready in the moment as the breaking news happened. Look, we get a basic readout from the White House, right? Russian media, or the Russian side, puts out kind of a basic statement. But what is your impressions of the talks? Because I know you're deeply sourced in Russia. So how does Russia think the talks on the phone went between Putin and Trump?
Well, basically feels that for the first time in decades, we're dealing with adults on the American side, right? Because when we look at our attempts to have a diplomacy with the Biden administration, it was totally counterproductive. A, because they were totally dishonest, and B, because they seemed to be living in some sort of delusional, paranoid fantasy land. Whereas with Trump, when you look at this phone call, this, just as a fun fact, this is the longest phone call that Putin has ever had with a foreign leader in the 25 years that he's been president and prime minister. And I think the overall strategic goal of this phone call was to talk about Trump's initiative about a 30-day ceasefire. And Putin emphasized that Russia's open to this in principle, but there's a lot of details that need to be worked out first, because the golden rule of ceasefires is that there will always be violations of this ceasefire. So you need to prepare ahead of time to game plan. How are we going to register these ceasefire? Who's going to be responsible for doing that? Who's going to be like the third-party arbiters? All that sort of stuff. And so this was part of the discussion. Another part of the discussion is what happens with the Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk? Because President Trump urged Putin to basically let them go. And Putin said that, look, if they surrender, we'll guarantee them their lives and good treatment. But these people committed war crimes against Russian civilians in Kursk. And Emerald, just for the record, I've seen the videos of what the Ukrainians did in Kursk. I've seen the mutilated bodies of civilians that were murdered, tortured, raped, and it's just absolutely, medieval level barbarism. That's the only way I could describe it. And so Putin said that, given this background, we can't just let them go home calmly and, enjoy the rest of their lives in peace. No, there needs to be some sort of justice. There needs to be some sort of accountability, which is why, we are intent on taking the Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk prisoner so that they can face accountability. That being said, I think Putin made a sort of important goodwill gesture during this phone call, because President Trump said, okay, maybe we can't do a 30-day ceasefire right now, but what about a 30-day cessation on strikes against energy infrastructure. And Putin immediately called the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, and ordered him to halt any energy strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure for 30 days. So Putin's willing to get this process moving. The ball is now in Zelensky's court, because I mentioned this 30-day halt on strikes against energy infrastructure. Right before I came on your show, I read some Telegram accounts affiliated with the Ukrainian military, and they are freaking out about this proposal by President Trump. They don't want to stop any sort of fighting. They don't want to stop strikes against energy infrastructure. They didn't really want a ceasefire in the first place. Zelensky's whole game plan was to basically try and act like he wants peace, but do so on terms unacceptable for Russia. So when the entire peace process would collapse, he could then go and blame Putin. I don't think President Trump will fall for these tricks, and I think that Zelensky will have to put up or shut up in the near future.
Well, I think that was clear based on how the Oval Office conversation went with Vladimir Zelensky, right? Basically, Trump did call him out for not maybe really wanting a real ceasefire, and that's become pretty evident to a lot of people in America that it's lip service. But I think even Zelensky, when you see him talk publicly, he makes it pretty clear that he's not really interested in a ceasefire, and he keeps on to the terms of having Ukraine enter NATO. I do want to get to one other point of contention, particularly when it comes to the Russian side. The U.S. does continue to supply Ukraine with weapons and ammunition. I know that's something that Putin has said has to be addressed as part of a potential ceasefire. Was that discussed based on anything you've heard? And where did Trump seem to stand on that issue?
Yes, but in the Kremlin readout, they explicitly state that one of the preconditions for a full 30-day ceasefire would be the cessation of Western arms and intelligence to Ukraine. The readout on the Kremlin side didn't make any, indication of Trump's response, and the White House readout didn't make any indication of the White House's response. So I think that this is an issue that's going to be worked out. But I just want to explain to your viewers, why is this such a sticking point for Russia? The reason this is such a sticking point is because back in 2014, 2015, Russia tried to prevent the civil war going on in the Donbas region from becoming a full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine. And there was this effort called the Minsk peace process, which included Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany. And basically, this was a deal on terms very favorable to Ukraine. It would see the Donbas fully reintegrated back into Ukraine. But the only conditions was that the people in Donbas would first be allowed to hold elections before rejoining Ukraine, and that there had to be some sort of guarantees about certain political rights, certain cultural rights. And as a result, the Ukrainians basically strung Russia along for 8 years. They constantly violated the agreement, and they basically used this agreement as a cover to rearm and rebuild their military. And so as a result, when Putin finally decided to send in troops into Ukraine in 2022, the Ukrainian military was far more prepared for a major war than it was in 2014. And Russia learned its lesson that you can't trust the Ukrainians, and that if you want a peace process with the Ukrainians, you have to make sure that they don't get any opportunity to rearm, to rebuild, and to prepare for a new war.
Well, you bring up the contested areas. It has been reported that Trump would actually be open to recognizing Crimea, right, as Russian territory. In fact, this tweet says that Trump is actually considering recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. Do you think that ultimately will result of any kind of deal that is reached?
I mean, I think that recognition of Crimea is an obvious first step because, like, let's be obvious. The people of Crimea voted 95% in 2014 to rejoin Russia. Everyone in Crimea speaks Russian. Crimea is historically, culturally, linguistically, religiously Russian. And so, just accepting the fact that Crimea, which has been back in under the Russian fold for 11 years now, 11 years to this day, by the way, this is a basic recognition of reality. I do think that for a sustainable peace process, and Russia thinks that for a sustainable peace process, we need to sort of put a final resolution to the territorial question. And that means that Zelensky needs to recognize the new territorial realities, that Russia has liberated Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, Lugansk, and the people of these regions voted in a referendum in September 2022 to rejoin Russia. And, this is the only way forward, because if Zelensky keeps up his territorial claims, then that means that war will restart in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And so we don't want that. I don't think President Trump wants that. And so, again, the question is, will Zelensky accept territorial reality?
Not only was the Ukraine conflict on the agenda today for the phone call, but the two leaders also discussed, according to the White House readout, rising tensions between Israel and Iran. Our own Brandon Weichert, a resident geopolitical analyst, whom I know you know as well, said this on the show last week about a potential strike on Iran from Israel. Listen.
But the Iranians are already saying they're not going to accept nuclear negotiation. And Trump has already said the red line for him is he will not let Iran get nukes. And therefore, I believe the Moab is actually going to be used to hit that facility. And you're seeing right now already the Israelis hit Iran in October of last year. And I think that was sort of a pregame for this pending strike. And I think Trump hopes this is going to lead to a negotiated settlement. I actually think, though, if he does this, it's going to trigger a wider war.
Can Russia and the U.S. kind of their conversation together prevent this wider war? Prevent this from happening?
I mean, that's definitely something Russia would like to do, because I don't think it's any secret that over the past few years, Russia and Iran have become very close, in large part, I should add, to President Biden's foreign policy. But Russia doesn't want a major war in the Middle East, because that would be damaging to Russian logistics. That would be potentially dangerous to Russian troops stationed in Syria. And the last thing, Russia, which has a large Muslim population, it doesn't want to see the Middle East in flames, generally speaking. So Russia is in a unique position because it has good relations with pretty much all the countries in the region. It has good relations with Iran, but very few people know that Russia actually has pretty good relations with Israel. Putin and Netanyahu in particular seem to have decent personal chemistry. And even though Russia's not a big fan of what Israel did in Gaza, what Israel did in Lebanon, Russia still sees Israel as a key player in the Middle East, and they want to have at least a good/normal relationship with them. So in Russia's ideal world, Russia would be able to sort of serve as a middleman between the United States and the United States and Iran, be an honest broker, because we have certain credibility with the Iranians. And we're hopefully building some credibility with the Trump administration right now. And so if we're able to get a peace deal over Ukraine, maybe we could use that momentum to get a grand US-Iran deal in the Middle East, which would make, I think, Donald Trump the most successful diplomatic American president in recent history. And we're happy to facilitate that, because that's good for the United States, that's good for Russia, that's good for Iran, that's good for humanity. It's good for everyone except George Soros and, Victoria Nuland and the psychopaths who want to destroy the United States, Russia, and all of humanity.
I'm sure Victoria Nuland is working the phones right now as we speak to try to undo any good that was done in any conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. At the least, we're seeing a major departure from the neocon foreign policy, right? We are seeing that. There's also a potential realignment. We'll see how these next steps go. Thank you so much, Dimitri. As always, Dimitri Symes.
Thank you.
You, my friend, need Native Path collagen, made with only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen in your body. It's found in cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, your gut. Type 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Also, Native Path collagen has no additives, no artificial sweeteners. It's also completely flavorless, which is important because Native Path collagen can be added to anything. I put it in my coffee. Also, because of its special peptide formulation, it mixes more easily than any other collagen I've ever tried, and I've tried a lot. But the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. Plus, they have a 365-day no-risk guarantee, making Native Path the trusted choice. All you have to do is visit getnativepath.com/truth. That's getnativepath.com/truth to start your transformation. Well, justice during the Biden regime may have been delayed, but the Trump administration is trying to ensure at least that it will not be denied. The 2 senior IRS agents who investigated Hunter Biden for his very many federal tax problems have been hired by Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. Here is Bessent explaining why he hired these 2 men to Maria Bartiromo earlier today.
So I went and decided I would bring them into Treasury, give them a year to investigate the wrongdoing that's going on at the IRS, and then they will go back in. Mr. Shapley will serve as the senior deputy for investigation and enforcement. So we'll have them in Treasury. We'll learn what's been going on at the IRS, what's been wrong, how could this Hunter Biden nonsense have happened, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone again, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents.
But that's not all. Also, after our segment yesterday with Garrett Ziegler, who has been doggedly investigating Hunter Biden, so much so that Hunter's wife has a particular bone to pick with him, Garrett has been investigating him for many alleged crimes. After our segment yesterday, President Donald Trump announced this. He said, quote, Hunter Biden has had Secret Service protection for an extended period of time, all paid for by you and me, the United States taxpayer. There are as many as 18 people on his detail, which is ridiculous. He is currently vacationing in, of all places, South Africa, where the human rights of people have been strenuously questioned. Because of this, South Africa has been taken off our list of countries receiving economic and financial assistance. Please be advised that effective immediately, Hunter Biden will no longer receive Secret Service protection. So, has his detail actually been taken away? Where does that stand? Join us now to give us the latest is Marco Polo's Garrett Ziegler, who promised yesterday to join us today for the very latest, because we knew there would be some movement, and there immediately was. I think that President Trump was unequivocal in his order. Both he spoke it out verbally, he then added it to Twitter. I'm sure there was probably a guidance to the Secret Service. So is U.S. Secret Service complying, Garrett Ziegler?
We have no evidence of their compliance yet. And in fact, we responded to a statement that the Secret Service spokesman gave to the New York Times yesterday that said the Secret Service is aware of President Trump's order and they will comply as soon as possible. Well, we responded with, what part of immediately do you not understand? There could be a gulf between as soon as possible and immediately. So this career bureaucrat who's the chief spokesman of the Secret Service, who told multiple lies about the assassination attempt against President Trump in Butler, PA, he needs to recognize who he works for and see to it that the detail is withdrawn immediately. And we will know for sure within 6 hours, and it gets light out in Cape Town. And we actually have inside sources that say Melissa is furious about this and is wanting an armed vehicle provided by the embassy in Pretoria in that country. That's how entitled she thinks she is. She thinks she's basically Meghan Markle. In fact, Melissa's been more crazed about this scenario than Hunter. Absolutely abominable. This is a basic ask. The ask is that Joe has 3 federal pensions, one from the Senate, one from the vice presidency, and one from the presidency. He should take $50K a year. He gets like $500K in pension, and just provide that security to his children. He always says he loves them, the big Uncle Joe shtick, or, he's such a good father. Why isn't he paying for his own children's security? Why should the Secret Service have to protect his deadbeat?
To be fair to the younger Mrs. Biden, the wife, current wife of Hunter Biden, of course she feels entitled, Garrett Ziegler. Because the great Laura Loomer also broke this news recently that they have been provided vehicles from the embassy, which is funded, right? It is a part of the U.S. State Department for his personal use while he's vacationing in Cape Town, South Africa. So, of course, Melissa's going to ask them for an armored vehicle because she's already been provided for vehicles by the State Department, right?
It's a great point. We ran the plates for those vehicles and they resolved to U.S. Embassy, Pretoria Street in Pretoria. Absolutely insane. Yeah, we've been working with Laura and providing those pictures from our PI because we're using these photos that our PI took in our motion for fees that's going to be released on Friday. So we're using this report from the PI in our motion for attorney fee reimbursement. And the argument's very simple. Hunter Biden was not honest with a federal court when he said he was indigent. And not only was he not honest with the federal court, but he's using that same government to fund his vacations and to protect him over there. That is so disgusting. And there's no other way to put it. I mean, if you're going to be a con, don't be a con on taxpayer dime. That is unpalatable. And all we're seeking is reimbursement. We're not seeking punitive damages. All we want is to be made whole. And remember, Hunter has never accused us of telling a lie about him. They've just called us names, but they've never actually called us liars. So all we're doing is reporting his own behavior. You tell a judge you're indigent, then you jet off to Cape Town and stay in a villa right by the ocean and expect us not to pursue our fees? I mean, after all this time, you'd think that they would not underestimate us. I mean, they think that we're going to go along with this. I don't know what country they think we're from, but we're Americans and we can't get screwed like this without putting up a fight.
But think about it, Garrett Ziegler, and this is why I applaud you. You were one of the few groups who have actually put up a fight because look, you got that U.S. Secret Service employee who's saying, oh, well, we'll comply when we're able to. I found out today that and I haven't even broke this story yet. I'm working on breaking it now. That there's still a bad actor in the Trump Department of Justice that has been aiding Hunter Biden's legal team in the lawsuit against Patrick Byrne, basically having private communications and agreements that are illegal in a court of law. Right? It sounds like the judge is going to put a stop to that now, and they're required to add in Mr. Byrne's legal counsel on these communications as they discuss the way to go about discovery. So of course they're shocked that someone like you won't leave them alone. And I that's why I love and I recommend that people support your organization.
I appreciate it. They can do so by buying the book, BidenReport.com. Before I forget, the cherry on top was President Trump revoking Ashley Biden's detail, which is 13 men strong. So we have a volunteer going over.
She still had a security detail herself, Ashley Biden of 13 men?
Ashley Biden had 13 men, and that was part of that True Social statement. That was a cherry on top. We wanted to give these pictures to President Trump to get Hunter's security revoked. That was a cherry on top. So we have somebody going into Addison Street today, which is where Ashley resides in Philadelphia, and we'll be making sure that those Secret Service are not there. Joe can pay for his own family security if he thinks they're under threat. By the way, we don't think they're under threat. Nobody cares about these people, right? So the fact that Joe is being so greedy that he won't even pay for his own children's security, he's putting it on you and me, just shows what type of feral family this is.
I was having a conversation with someone who was targeted by the Biden regime over the last 4 years. And the conversation we had was that, oh, well, I'm doing great, but we won't be taking vacations this year, but it's okay because we're together, and then you see that our taxpayer, and these people are still paying taxes, and our taxpayer funds are paying for Hunter a nice vacation in Cape Town. I do want to ask about another story that we followed up on. I gave the news that Secretary Bessent gave earlier today on Maria Bartiromo's show that he did hire those IRS whistleblowers related to Hunter Biden's tax returns, which is great, right? That's great. We're glad to see that they are rewarded for doing the right thing. We also need to see those people who continue to take care of the Biden family, who are still embedded in our government. We need to see them fired. That Secret Service agent, I think he needs to be held accountable. He still has a security detail, if your investigators find in Cape Town in the next few hours that Hunter has a security detail still, that guy needs to be put on immediate leave. No questions asked, right? And then there's this
He's
other
defying a presidential order. I don't know what government he thinks he works for, but the president elected President Trump to make those decisions. They didn't elect a Secret Service agent to decide who he gets to guard. We're his boss. We're delegating our authority to President Trump, who made that decision. So these are bad actors. And to your point, Derek Hines needs to be walked out of the building, just like that rogue lawyer Bean, who's in litigation with Byrne. Who are these people? I mean, yes, Shapley especially. Shapley was the first one who went forward. Ziegler came in as a response to a subpoena. Ziegler's done great work. Shapley especially, I think he should be the IRS director. But that's great that Shapley got a promotion. But if this is going to stand, we just put on the screen, Derek Hines. I'm not saying Derek Hines needs to go to prison. I could make a good argument to a jury that he obstructed justice. But let's just do the bare minimum. Let's just make sure he's not in our government anymore. That's step number one. Get them out. This guy is he's not just a line attorney, Emerald. He's the first assistant U.S. attorney. He's the supervisor day-to-day of all criminal federal prosecutions for Philadelphia, top dozen metro area in the United States. Some of our biggest gangbangers live in a place that he is in charge of. This is a disaster.
Ironically, where Ashley Biden seems to be staying these days as well. And just to remind people who Derek Hines and how he relates to the Hunter Biden scandals, let's take a listen from what Garrett had to say on our show yesterday.
You got to understand, David Weiss was the special counsel, and he only had two prosecutors underneath him, Leo Wise and Derek Hines. Derek Hines was the lead prosecutor, the first chair trial lawyer at the gun trial in Delaware in June of 2024. The big thesis here is that Derek Hines is good friends, and Louis Freeh was his former boss, good friends with Louis Freeh, one of the most corrupt people in the history of the Bureau, which is a hard list to make. He was the director of the Bureau under Clinton. And secondly, this was the one who tried to get Hunter to sign off on a slap on the wrist plea deal. The only reason why it wasn't agreed to was the judge started asking questions because she realized the plea deal in July of 2023 was unprecedented.
So we've identified 3 people that we need to see action on probably by the end of the week. That's the Secret Service employee that is defying Trump's order on Hunter's detail. Yes. Derek Hines, that's now in Philadelphia as a U.S. attorney, right? And then we also have the first U.S. attorney, and we have Sam Bean, who is working out of D.C. and is involved in Hunter's L.A. case, it seems, according to what is filed recently and according to a Zoom hearing yesterday with Judge Wilson from California in that case. Garrett Ziegler, you got the receipts, your name and names, and you're keeping track.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. This is exciting. It's the best dopamine hit and the healthiest dopamine hit in the world to track these scumbags. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
And every taxpayer is here, thank you. We'll check in at the end of the week and see if there's been any movement on those 3 names we named. We'll see. I can't wait to see what your investigators find in Cape Town in just a matter of a couple hours. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you, Emerald.
Are you looking for monthly income without the risk of stocks because you don't feel like maybe you're well-versed enough in the stock market? Well, here's something you won't hear about on CNBC. There's a unique way to collect royalties directly from America's most productive oil fields. No exploring, drilling, or operational headaches required. You simply collect checks month after month. And the best part? You can get started with just $25 through any brokerage account. The Oxford Club's chief income strategist, Mark Lichtenfeld, breaks down what he believes is the #1 oil royalty play for 2025. Simply visit RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. MyPillow is excited to announce that they're having the first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. Save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. You all know that's one of my favorite products. Also save 30% on their brand new My Crosses. They come in both men and women's. They're made right here in the good old US of A. Get the 2025 6-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. And of course, the best-selling standard MyPillow, the Icon, just $14.98. So to take advantage of the first ever mega sale, all you got to do is go to mypillow.com and use the promo code TRUTH, mypillow.com, promo code TRUTH, or call the toll-free number you see at the bottom of your screen, 800-944-5396. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Wow. That ship is sale because right now every single order ships absolutely free no matter how much you spend. And that's the absolute truth.
National security, my administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it. Just today, a large American company announced they are buying both ports around the Panama Canal and lots of other things having to do with the Panama Canal and a couple of other canals.
Well, now all of America has focused its vision on the Panama Canal, which we've been watching for months now, thanks to our friends Michael Yon and Masako Ganaha, who will join us in a moment. But that was President Donald Trump from his recent address to Congress. And he was referring, of course, to the U.S. investment firm known as BlackRock, having recently purchased 2 vital ports on the Atlantic and Pacific ends of the Panama Canal. But like I said, Yon and Masako Ganaha are convinced that selling those ports to the U.S.-based BlackRock was merely the start of a much larger operation by the United States under President Trump, an operation that they say will lead to U.S. military forces taking direct control over the Panama Canal zone. In fact, during a recent blackout in Panama, Michael Yon reported on his Substack that, quote, many Panamanians thought the power outage was due to Americans invading, which was a solid and reasonable guess. And I, Michael Yon, was watching for flashes of light and booms. In January of this year, I spoke with geopolitical expert and one of the producers of this show, Brandon Weichert, and he said this about Trump's Panama Canal strategy.
Basically, we are creating a bubble around North America in particular. We are squeezing all the choke points and making sure that we're going to be able to push out, for instance, the Chinese and the Caribbean from the Panama Canal, their holdings there. They've been able to spread into the Caribbean basin. I live in Florida, so they're right around the corner from me. We don't want them there. So this is all part of that plan. And I think the Panama Canal is definitely going to happen.
So in other words, this is the next step in terms of restoring hemispheric defense, but defense against whom? To explore this important topic with us are Michael Yon, an independent war correspondent, and Masako Ganaha, who joins us again this week and is an independent journalist. Both have been spending a lot of time in the Panama Canal zone. Michael is there now. Masako actually joins us from Japan today. Thank you both for coming on with us together. This is such a pleasure.
Thanks. Masako has a lot to say, so I'm going to defer to Masako.
Thank you very much for having me on. And today, Michael is actually in Panama Canal, so I will make it short. But I think what we are witnessing is not just one company buying another company. It's much a bigger thing. And Michael is actually telling me to come back to Panama because this may be first war experience for me, I think. Is that right, Michael?
I hope not, because if I thought it was that dangerous, I wouldn't want you to come back. But that doesn't mean it would be, a walk in the park, because it's clear that something could happen. And so I'll be in position to watch some likely places that it might happen at. But it's clear that we're going to take the canal one way or the other, or we're going to go for it, right? And I think that we'll succeed. But it could get quite dangerous, obviously, if you're not thinking ahead on where you should be and how you should be. But the bottom line is there's a lot more going on in the world than just the Panama Canal. You heard Trump talk about canals. I think he's talking about the Suez. I've said many times, I think we're going to go for the Suez as well. And obviously Bab al-Mandeb, that's why he's bombing the Houthis, right? Because the Bab al-Mandeb and the Suez are greatly affected by this. Now, the threats against Iran, which have been going for decades now, and a lot of push, back and forth. By the way, huge amounts of Iranians have come through the Darien Gap. Masako and I have been this close. I mean, we've been so close, we've shaken hands with them, like literally, coming through the Darien Gap. We've talked with quite a lot of them, and huge numbers. I don't even know how many, but it would be in the thousands of Iranians who've come through just the Darien Gap. That doesn't include Canada and that sort of thing. So we've actually been invaded by the same people that they want to go to war with. But the war with Iran obviously is about other things. It's about shutting down Russia's corridor to the sea. It's about the Straits of Hormuz. It's about energy and those sorts of things. It's about a lot more than it's advertised to be about. When he mentioned canals, he could be talking about the Suez Canal, which I think he is talking about, and possibly at some point building the Ben Gurion Canal, because that would, if you had control of Panama, Suez Canal, Bab al-Mandeb, and you had a Ben Gurion Canal as well, and also the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, that's utter power right there. That's unbelievable global influence right there. I mean, if you control the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, really, that's a really checkpoint on Russia and many other people. So there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. It's not about the things that get people riled up as they think it's about Hamas versus Jews or that sort of thing, that's not what this is about. This is a much, much bigger game.
And it's interesting because we just had a segment where we talked to Moscow-based journalists, particularly about the issue of Iran, right? And how so much of this is really about the conversation related to Iran, and Russia clearly has such a strong relationship there. When we're talking about us militarily taking the Panama Canal, though, Michael, help us understand what that would look like. The U.S. military would come in. Would anybody be fighting back? China has a vested interest in the canal. So would Chinese troops try to keep that from happening should the military come in? How do the Panamanians feel? Would they put up some kind of defense against this? What does it actually look like?
I doubt the Chinese would do any kinetic defense. Interestingly, though, I published a couple of months ago that I thought if something happens, it'll be on a dark moon, like a new moon, or a full moon. And I specifically said, for instance, possibly the 14th of March. And on the 15th of March, Saturday night, there was that explosion at the major power plant, which caused a lot of power outage across most of Panama, right? Was that a message from China? I do not know. Because, when the United States invaded in 1989, of course, the power went out. Often when I was in combat in Iraq, if your phones suddenly went out, you could pretty much bet, we were coming in, right? So, I mean, this sort of thing is normal. And so when the electricity went out on Saturday night, which was a bright moon, attacking on a weekend would make sense, of course, because there's less traffic out and that sort of thing. I mean, so it made perfect sense. I thought maybe something is happening right now. Saturday night, bright moon, boom, goes out. Luckily, nothing happened. I mean, I think, obviously we need to do our thing to secure our canal. But I think most of the Panamanians want us to do it. So if we do it, wisely, I think you can kind of just slip into a lot of it without any dramas. There will be some dramas, no doubt about that, because the global communist network has long wanted to make the Panama Canal internationalized. In fact, in the book The Naked Communist, as a Canadian officer messaged to me yesterday, I think it was point 44 or something along those lines. In The Naked Communist, the book talks about taking the Panama Canal and internationalizing it, right? Which has happened. Now, I think there's going to be violence this week, probably about Friday. There are a lot of protests that are unfolding with Suntrax, which is a communist labor organization. They're very violent. And also, like earlier today, the Mugle Indians are all pulling back to their reservation, which in Panama they call it comarca, means reservation. They're pulling back into it, and the Mugle are very famous for being competent and willing to take casualties. That's not about America. That's not about the canal. That's about copper mines and other things that affect those indigenous people. In fact, I just published on it like 10 minutes before you and I just came on. And so there's a lot of different texture of what's going on here. So if you see violence on Friday, that's not going to be about the United States. You may see some American flags burned or whatever, but that's internal. That's about Social Security. That's about because they got the same Social Security dramas we have. That's about the copper mine and some other issues.
But that's good to know, because if the first thing we would think is because we were trying to take the Panama Canal, if we saw some violence down there in Panama. You brought up the aspect of all of this, that there was this push to internationalize the canal. The globalists really wanted it. So Masako, when you and I first spoke years ago, that's what we were talking about, globalism, right? You were based at the World Economic Forum in Davos when you first joined us the first time. So I know you, like I were probably, when we saw that BlackRock was buying these two entities, right, on each other side of the canal, that was concerning to me, because I thought that's what this move was the kind of internationalizing that Michael was talking about. But it seems as if you, Masako, and Michael are saying that this was actually part of a move by the Trump administration, so we shouldn't be too worried about BlackRock buying down in the canal. Yes or no?
You talking to me or Masako?
Masako. I was asking Masako that question.
I think when we talk about like an international matter like this, I think like people like me or you, like a true conservative, based on the truly merit for our countries, are we really a player in this world? That's what I started to think. In other words, this seems to be globalist versus globalist fighting. So when BlackRock announced that they are planning to purchase, it wasn't surprising to me. But at the same time, it was not something that I could be happy with. But so, of course, President Trump won the election. That's something to do with, I think, he cannot be truly MAGA if he were to be in that position. And he's also close with Pfizer, those companies who we consider to be super globalist. So it's not like Trump is doing good and BlackRock is stepping in or something like this. It's like gray zone. And so I don't know if I am explaining well, but I'm still concerned. But I think it's very difficult for me to say, because if China takes Panama Canal, that's worse for everybody. Yes.
So it's the lesser of two evils. And speaking of China in the Panama area, you all have highlighted something that I wanted to dive into a little bit more that Masako mentioned, I believe, the last time she was on the show, and that's the city of knowledge. Can you explain what that is, Masako, to our audience?
Yes. So when United States made Panama Canal, they were in charge of for the security of Panama Canal. So there are many U.S. bases, including what's called Fort Clayton. Now that place is called City of Knowledge. And so now the former U.S. base is kind of like a place for where a lot of the international globalist organization are stationed in. So organization like UN, IOM, International Organization for Migration, which is the entity destroying United States by weaponization of migration, and like World Food Program, UNICEF, HIAS, those big organizations are stationed in City of Knowledge. So we are saying that we need to close down the City of Knowledge because that's the infrastructure which is destroying United States.
And that's something you talked about recently on the show as well, Michael Yon. Have you had any conversation with Tom Homan about the fact that the infrastructure still exists down there to commit mass invasion into the United States?
My message to him a few days ago, he responded that he's recommending investigations into some of these NGOs. But I've been crystal clear, including in some calls this morning, that if we don't close these camps down, nothing else matters. And keep in mind, Fink from BlackRock.
Even retaking the canal doesn't matter.
That matters, but I mean the invasion part will still continue because the infrastructure is there. And for instance, those camps, that's Masako's been in that camp many times. That's San Vicente camp. They're looking at expanding that right now. I just had a call about that this morning. They're going to probably put out bids soon to expand that camp. We call that China camp. See the fires there? I asked somebody to drone it right after the fires. Tren de Aragua had a riot shortly after Masako and I and Ann Vandersteel, we were in there and we left, and then they had a riot, wounded some center front guys very badly, almost killed a couple. And so that was Tren de Aragua. Some of them are in prison now for that. Now, Larry Fink from BlackRock, he's very clear that he wants the invasions to continue into the United States. He wants, and you see they're talking about selling off our federal land now for housing. This is about replacement population, which BlackRock man Fink is all in for. So on that regard, China and BlackRock want the same thing. Keep in mind, BlackRock is one of the few companies that's allowed to do big finance stuff in China, right? They're allowed to do things in China that other companies can't do. This isn't like, BlackRock is separate from China. This is brackish water, right? There's a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, there is. So I'll get back to the BlackRock question. As it factors into the U.S. taking the canal, how concerned are you, Michael? The question I asked Masako about BlackRock buying into the canal.
Big time. Big time. Now, Masako and I both talked about many months ago that one way to ameliorate the problems is for the U.S. Now, keep in mind, the canal and the ports are separate, right? The canal this is where a lot of people get confused.
Sure.
They get confused about the canal operation versus the ports. The ports are, those are privately operated, right? By Taiwanese and others, right? China, obviously. But that's basically like the street is operated by the city, but then there's vendors on the street. So those ports are vendors, right? Like the railway is run by an American company, right? And so there's a railway that goes, it's a transcontinental railway because it's a skinny part of the continent here, and Masako actually is ridden all the way across on that train in the locomotive, actually taking video. But so this is the operations around the canal are what we're talking about now that BlackRock is taking, right? Or at least part of it. There's other ports out there that nobody's talking about, of course, that are run by Taiwanese and others, because we're not as concerned about those because they're not actual straight up hardcore enemy. However, that said, Masako and I were in Taiwan last year, and we look at this closely. And Taiwan and mainland China are, they're consanguinating, right? I mean, thousands of Taiwanese companies are in China and have been for years. So it's not like Taiwan and China are completely separate any more than BlackRock and China are completely separate. And keep in mind, China has big stakes and a lot of U.S. infrastructure in the United States, at our ports in the United States and otherwise, right? So it's not just here, it's global. Same thing over in Netherlands, where Masako and I go. We've been quite a few times because Netherlands is so key as well. China's doing the same thing down in Thailand. They've been wanting to build what they call the Thai Canal across the Kra Isthmus. Right now, they're working on a railway, but China and Thailand have had a falling out on that. But China's building a railway into Thailand now, and they've made a lot of progress. They're opening stations after station, and it's already sucking off a lot of Thai jobs up to China, which Masako was there for about a month researching this, or maybe longer. I don't remember how long we were there, Masako, but we saw quite a lot.
Yeah. Masako Ganaha, Michael Yon, thank you so much for joining us. We'll keep our eye on Panama this week. And as you predict, you do expect something to happen soon, if not this week, in the near future. And Michael Yon, your predictions have been pretty spot on in the past. So we'll be watching out, and we'll talk to both of you again soon. Thank you for joining us together.
Thank you. Thanks, Emerald.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for the Absolute Truth today, but we'll see you tomorrow with a whole lot more truth.